That's so exciting. So after 2 talks on meat, I'm very excited about our next speaker, Michael Selden, the CEO of Finless Foods from San Francisco, as Michael will elaborate on cell-based seafood alternatives in a minute. Finless Foods is a food startup working toward producing cell-based seafood at affordable prices. His background in biochemistry and molecular biology has played a large role in him dedicating his life to climate justice and science advocacy. His research has spanned various fields, from resolving food crises in Africa to marine conservation in Southeast Asia. He has worked for The New Harvest and was also an editor-in-chief of the Chinese news website China Smack. So, warm welcome for Michael Selden.
Is this on? Great. Hello, everybody. So this is a talk that I don't usually give in front of this audience, so I'll do a little bit of like a participatory thing at first, but I think I'll get the same result that I usually get in front of the aquaculture people or like the agriculture people, but for different reasons. So I want to start my talk off by talking about 2 types of fish. One of them is actually an eel. And so the one on your left is called Kampachi. Can everyone please raise your hand if you've ever had Kampachi in your life? 1, 2. Oh, 3, 4. They're all on this side. So basically 4 people in this room have like considerably more than that. The next thing I want to ask about is a bit more difficult. On your right, this is an eel. In Japanese, it's called hamo. In English, we say it's a dagger-toothed pike conger, which by that I mean we don't eat it. But can you please raise your hand if you've had this? That is wild to me. Okay. It's usually the other way around. Maybe 20 people-ish. So still, this is a large room of people. These are 2 things that are fairly common in a different region of the world. Why has nobody here, more or less, had either of these things? And I know this is kind of like a vegetarian-vegan space, but I get this response in most rooms outside of Japan. So in order to talk about like why people here haven't really had these things that are pretty delicious, I want to talk about like how fish is made and how seafood is produced. So when people talk about seafood being produced, generally, what's discussed is like boats. You've got people on boats pulling fish out of the water, either wild caught, which is sort of the last like frontier of mass hunting that humans do, or from aquaculture, which is still over 90% done in the ocean in large mariculture nets and are still pulled up onto these boats and sold to people on land. But there's no reason why boats have to be involved in seafood production whatsoever, or the ocean at all. And luckily, before me, I just had Yakov and Mark explain absolutely everything. That's great. So basically, everyone understood 100% of the last 2 talks, right? Awesome. I love that. So I won't go into detail then, because I was totally going to, and I totally am super smart and know all of these things too, definitely. But basically, like, I am a biochemist by training, in a much smaller way. And so when I think about how fish meat is produced, I'm thinking about cells. They're dividing to create more of themselves. And in an extreme simplification of Dr. Post's talk, these cells, they differentiate into terminal lineages. The main 3 that we're interested in are like the muscle cells, myocytes, the fat cells, adipocytes, and the connective tissue, which are fibroblasts. These 3 cells provide most of the functionality of meat. They end up, fusing together, creating these myofibers, which are muscle, essentially. So at Finless Foods, what we're doing is we are taking fish production back to basics. We're really starting over with the building blocks of fish production without involving a lot of unnecessary stuff, like boats or the ocean. So what we do is an extreme simplification of the last 2 talks. So what we do is we take a sample from a real fish, pull it out, isolate just the cells of interest, give them the nutrients they need to grow out, and then allow these cells to grow into the same form factor, the same look, mouthfeel, flavor profile of real fish. So theoretically, you can take one sample from each species of fish once and grow that out effectively forever if you're giving it the right food. So what are these cells eating? In large part, what they're eating are salts, sugars, and proteins. The salts and sugars are things that you can get food safe anywhere else. You're probably already eating all of them right now. The proteins are something that we're producing in-house ourselves using fermentation. And so how does this fermentation process work? So basically, we're looking at what proteins are most important inside of a fish for the growth of a fish. We find the DNA that makes, the RNA that makes the proteins inside the fish, pull that out, and then put it into a microbial system. So this is the same way that we make insulin today. It's the same way that we make rennet if you eat cheese. That's what is a really important part of cheese production. And yeah, so basically this is a fairly understood process. There's a lot of machinery around that you can use, a lot of expertise. We're not really breaking scientific boundaries by doing so. And what you have at the end of this beginning process is you have essentially a fish paste. And it's really important to keep the flavor the same, to keep the nutrition the same as fish caught in the wild, and also to get the price down to reasonable food levels. And we talked a bit about price in the last talk. We have a similar problem. But we're not really interested in stopping here with these sort of unstructured ground fish products, things like a spicy tuna roll, nagitaro. We really want to go all the way, and to do that, we dive into tissue engineering and 3D organ printing. I think my talk was supposed to start about half an hour ago, so I'm going to skip most of this part. But basically, if you ever see companies that are doing 3D organ printing or tissue engineering, it's a lot of the same science. Basically, what they're doing is trying to make tissue engineering more detailed, more precise. They're trying to make these 3D organs more functional. But we don't need them to function for us. We're basically printing fish muscle, and then we don't need it to be better, more functional, better able to integrate into biological systems. It just needs to taste good. And so we just need it to be cheaper. Yeah. And so at the end of that process, these are all mock-ups, by the way, we didn't make these. At the end of that process, you end up with something much more like a steak, piece of fish fillet, sashimi. And so for us, since culturing a fish cell from the cheapest fish you can think of, like a tilapia, costs the same as culturing a cell from the most expensive type of fish you can imagine, we decided to start with the most expensive type of fish that you can imagine. So we're working mostly in bluefin tuna, which is great because it's a threatened species. There's a really easy message to get behind for a lot of people, even when they're not super interested in sort of the animal welfare, animal liberation aspect of this. So what we've done here is basically create a comparison between current mariculture techniques at their best and our stuff in just a little while. This is a slide that I usually bring up at aquaculture conferences because basically what's great about this field is that we have something for everyone. If you care about animals, we can do that. If you care about the environment, we're fixing that, I hope. If you care about health, we're creating fish without mercury, without plastic. We're not using antibiotics. We don't need to add growth hormones. But even if all you're trying to do is just grow fish to feed people, we can do that more efficiently in urban centers rather than drag it out from the fjords of Norway. And so if you see here, you'll see two 15,000-liter bioreactors. I think these are in Korea, if I remember this picture correctly. And then I believe those mariculture nets are off the coast of Norway. And if you look at the number of tons that we are producing, we're not doing as well as they are. But I would like to make one adjustment to these numbers to sort of switch things around a bit, because when we're producing things in these bioreactors, we're only producing the meat. But they're not. They're producing a lot of parts that aren't actually used as food. They're producing organs, they have blood. There's all of this energy that's wasted by fish swimming around and being fish. And we don't need to have that as part of the process. So if you adjust the numbers for that, we're actually doing quite well. And we actually end up producing more fish using our methodology with a smaller footprint in a more convenient location than fish farmers currently are doing it, the opposite of everything I just said. I'll skip this stuff. The press thinks we're cool. Thanks, press. So basically, Norwegian salmon is king. I've actually even seen it already here in Berlin. It's extremely nutritious. It's actually probably the most sustainable form of current animal agriculture you can find. And And a lot of the reason that it's done in Norway is just the conditions are perfect. The water is the right temperature. These fjords create really, really deep ocean-like geographies that make it very easy to have large mariculture nets, but they're very close to shore, so it makes it easy for the workers to actually get there and get back without having to sail way, way, way out to sea to find like big open ocean nets that break easily. There's a lot of extreme weather events. Fjords are also very calm. The fjords are sort of protecting the water around it from like extreme weather. And so because of that, it's shipped around the world, including here to Berlin. And if it's shipped here to Berlin, it's not so bad because it's going by land. And you'll end up basically with about half a kilogram of CO2 emissions per kilogram of salmon shipped here. But the problem is when it gets shipped further, and a lot of Norwegian salmon is eaten in way, way further geographies. So if you see this, this number is about Norwegian salmon being shipped to Japan, which it is all the time. And this, instead of half a kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of fish, we're up near 11 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of fish. A lot of it shipped by plane. Planes are awful. And so basically what we can do is completely change this process. Right now, seafood is very much tied to the ocean. It's tied to geographies that actually have a lot to do with the temperature of the water, the depth of the water, the labor force around there. What we can do is actually have it produced in dense urban cores where demand is. We have a much smaller footprint. We don't have a need for a fjord. And so like right now, fish is produced in the water or caught wild, brought onto the boats. The people at the boats sell it to people at the docks. The people at the docks sell it to national distributors who sell it to local distributors who sell it to grocery stores and restaurants, then eventually to people. Each step of this process adds price on, it adds cost on to the fish that people are eating. And there's really no reason to do it if we don't have to tie our fish production to the ocean. And so not only can we create something that's fresher, something that is more demand reactive because we have a shorter time frame, but also we can create something that just doesn't have to be shipped this far, create so many CO2 emissions, and also it doesn't get knocked around in transit. So it's actually a higher quality product because we don't have to ship it anywhere near as far. And so this is why most people here have not eaten either variety of this fish, and that's because it's mostly caught and sold in Japan. But one of the cool things that we can do that's kind of interesting about being a cell-based seafood company is that Finless Foods can localize any variety of fish anywhere. So all of these exotic varieties of things that like might look interesting or might seem appetizing, we can make that local, rather than now where you have to actually go to other parts of the world to try different types of cuisines. See anyone familiar? So yeah, other people are working on this too. In the interest of time, I'll skip it a little bit. So the like analogy that I give to non-scientists a lot of the time is like, what do you want to do if you are trying to teach one kid, one child, a student, one fact? Do you petition the school board to start the thinking about a new curriculum and then have them accept the new curriculum? It gets passed down to the teachers who then create lesson plans, and then on the day that the lesson is taught, the teacher has to be saying it, the kid has to be paying attention, and hopefully that ends up getting absorbed one way or another. Or do you just pull that child aside and talk to them individually if you just want to get across one fact? This is the metaphor that I give for the difference between whole animal biology versus animal cell biology. We have way less variables. We have way less problems to deal with. It's way less of a black box. There's just so fewer factors that it's actually a lot simpler in a lot of ways. The only reason we're having trouble right now is we've been doing animal agriculture for an extremely long time, but we can iterate so quickly in cell-based agriculture that I do believe we can catch up very quickly. With animals, every experiment that you want to do to reiterate has to be tied to the life cycle of an animal, so it can literally take years. But our cells live and die in a matter of days. And so any experiments that are being done to increase the efficiency of animal agriculture are just going to lag behind us very, very quickly. And there's a lot of possibilities here. I mean, we can do personalized nutrition for people. Do people want higher levels of omega-3, lower levels of omega-3? Do they want entirely muscle? Do they want entirely fat? Do they want a different ratio of that? We can produce the perfect cut of fish for every person every single time, depending on what their dietary needs are, their dietary wishes are. And beyond that, we can do things that are entirely new. This is fugu. Fugu is a poisonous puffer fish. Currently, in order to consume fugu in America, it has to be disassembled by a chef who was certified by the Japanese board of, fugu chefs. I'm sure there's a better name for that. But This really restricts access to this. We can create fugu entirely without poison and sell this in grocery stores, that people aren't actually in danger of hurting themselves via just eating this fish. And there's been a lot of weirder stuff here. So this is from a really great book. If you want to check it out, it's called the In Vitro Meat Cookbook. And there's a lot of interesting ideas in here. Sci-fi stuff that's really far in the future and might never happen, but super cool to consider. I love these things on your left. This idea is basically you can have like an aquarium in your home with a bioreactor attached. The bioreactor prints out these little structures that twitch because of the salt in the water, but they're not alive. And so when you pull them out with chopsticks, the salt will wear off. I can see everyone's looking super appetized by this. I can see it on your face. That's awesome. That's the intended effect. But then on the other side of this, you've got really cool ideas for like marketing this stuff. You can see over here, this is pork produced via Pookie, which is an imaginary pig. And the idea here is that Pookie is still alive. And so you could go online, check out the webcam, see how Pookie is doing while you are eating Pookie. And so this sounds like total nonsense, but actually this was done. A company called Just in San Francisco did take a cell sample from a chicken. This is Ian. And the people behind Ian are eating him, but he doesn't seem super bothered by it. Oh, this is a great video. You want to turn it on? Thank you.
We are making history right now. At Finless Foods, we're taking the first step into creating a world where everyone has access to fresh, healthy, delicious, and sustainable seafood. We're proud to announce the world's first clean fish ever to be eaten. This means fish produced entirely without cruelty, not just dolphin safe, but fish safe as well.
All right, you ready?
Put your fork in. There you go. What they've done is they've started with nothing, and they've built themselves a whole technological platform to make food in a way that just hasn't been done before.
Why would you choose to farm or fish wild fish with all that environmental and human health cost when you could just have it made by Finless Foods?
So yeah, just to step this more into the realm of reality, we brought together 25 of our friends and rented out a test kitchen in San Francisco and had them all eat for the first time clean carp. And that was a really cool and exciting thing. We are, I would say, a weird company, and we're a little bit nuts, and so we decided to be the first to ever feed, I believe, and I can be corrected on this if anyone knows better, the first to feed any sort of cell-based meats whatsoever to a journalist. Generally, this was done with people's friends, with models, with actors, actresses. We wanted to just get a third-party opinion. So you can read about that in The Guardian. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about like what inspired us and like what really brought us to this industry. There's this really awesome article you should definitely check out in 2014. It's called The Blood Harvest. It's in the Atlantic. So this article is basically about this animal, which is called a horseshoe crab. Horseshoe crabs have a very special blood. It's this bright blue, opaque color. It's really beautiful. And it's used for pharmaceutical QA. So most of the drugs that we need to keep people healthy require this. It's really important because horseshoe crabs live in the mud, as they have for millennia. And so basically their blood can clot very quickly, and so in order to protect them from like bacteria in the mud, so basically the blood, when put into a pharmaceutical produced in like a clean facility, if there's any bacteria or a hint of a bacterial toxin, it will immediately turn the entire solution to jelly. So this is really important in ensuring that we have safe stuff to keep us healthy. But basically we're ruining this habitat by killing so many of these horseshoe crabs. We're completely destroying the species, devastating the environment, and killing them in massive numbers. And so these scientists decided to come up with a solution. And so they started to create a synthetic version of this horseshoe crab blood. And when I read this article, I was like, well, if you can do that for blood, can't you just do that for meat? I was very vegan at the time and very interested in this idea. And so I started Googling it, and I found that I was not completely nuts. I was just mildly nuts. Mark Post was already working on his work. Thanks, Mark. And also New Harvest, a nonprofit organization that takes donor money to go towards people doing PhDs in this subject. And Modern Meadow was also in existence. So really fast, what's really cool about this story is that last year a follow-up article was put out, and it turns out that this synthetic horseshoe crab blood equivalent is taking off and is actually becoming a large sector of the market. It is replacing the like natural original version because it's just better. It's better produced, it's easily sourced, it's a stable supply chain, and it's cleaner. And I think that we can do that too with all animals. So what we want to do is really take this, really needlessly cruel, dirty, and inefficient industry and turn it into something that really is more in line with all of our morals. Something that is clean, something that is safe, something that is better for the planet, better for animals, and better for us. So yeah, what we want to do here is basically take these initial carp cells, these initial fish cells, and move them into producing a completely different type of seafood so we can change the way the entire world eats. So yeah, I'm Michael Selden, co-founder and CEO of Finless Foods. Thanks so much for listening. I think there's lunch now or something.
Thank you, Michael. Stay with us for a second. We're just going to see if there is any questions on your... Oh, there's one question over there. And you don't have a mic then. Do we have a spare mic for the question?
If you want, bring it over there.
Okay. A run and a run back. So where's the question? There you go. I'm just going to hold it.
Yes. You make it sound as if you could produce any fish from your cultures. Why is it so much easier for fish than for meat? Because those meat people were saying it will take some centuries, no, but decades to reach high-scale production.
Yes, that's a good question. It's easier in certain ways and not easier in other ways. There's very little research that's been done in seafood cell culture in any sort of like piscine systems. So we've had to really start from scratch in a lot of ways. Fish cells are a bit easier to work with, I feel, and probably other people feel differently, but they're very easily immortalized, if that means anything to the audience. They can self-immortalize without really doing much. They don't actually require to be stem cells in order to divide, which means that we have a bit of an easier problem than a lot of the other companies do. But also, it's kind of a totally blank space. If you want, you can read every single paper on seafood cell culture in about a week. Which means that the field doesn't exist, essentially. So while we've had to start from scratch, the metaphor that I use is basically we're basically shooting in a dark room, but at an extremely large target.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for the super visionary talk. Yeah, we're just going through here. Michael Selden of Finless Foods. So we're going to break for a little coffee break and networking break, and then we see each other again at 11:35 for the talk on insects. All right, see you in a bit.